Today we're going to learn Eruvin Daf Mem Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Judy Felber in honor of Lynn Farber and the Renana community. Thanks for helping us through yet another crisis. And by Joanna Ram and Rebecca Schwartzmer in memory of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a true tzaddiket, true champion for the rights of women everywhere and love, knowledge, and justice. May her memory be a blessing and may her family be comforted. We're going to start at the bottom of Mem Bet Amud Bet, just to review a few things before we move on. We were in the middle of a Mishnah about Mishotziu Nochrimu Ruach Ra. Somebody gets taken outside of the Tchum on Shabbat. And then what happens? Right, so then we had a few different things. What if, and the issue we're going to start with today, what if he was in a certain structure that had walls around it, whether it was a deer or a sahar? Right, the Mishnah talks, I just want to review the structure so you get it, because we're going to go back to something which is going to make it sound like the structure is one way, and if you don't look at it this morning, you won't really remember that it wasn't exactly this way. So first it talks about a machloket between Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah against Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva about a deer of a sahar, a pen or a stable, where it's a place that has machitzot around. So if you get put into this place when on Shabbat and it's outside of your tchum, so we say that you only have 4 amot according to Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva, and according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah and Rabban Gamliel, you can walk around the whole space because it has machitzot. Then they don't talk about the halacha about a boat, but they immediately move into a case that happened where all 4 of those rabbis were on a boat and got into a debate about what was allowed on the boat. But it's a bit of a strange debate because they don't really debate what's allowed and what's not allowed. They debate whether we should be extra stringent or not. So they were on a boat and they obviously left the tchum. So Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah say we can walk around this whole boat. I shouldn't even say it's obviously left the whole tchum because we're going to see maybe they didn't really. And Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva said you can't move from 4 amot, and it says because they wanted to be stringent. Okay, so now the Gemara assumes, Rav and Shmuel at least assume that they have a machloket both by the boat and by the deer v'sahar. And that's why what we saw at the end of yesterday's daf was, okay, I'm starting from about 10 lines from the bottom just to review. Amar Rav, hilchata k'Rabban Gamliel b'deer v'sahar u'sfina. We paskin like Rabban Gamliel in both cases. And Shmuel says, hilchata k'Rabban Gamliel b'sfina, aval b'deer v'sahar lo. So Shmuel says we paskin like Rabban Gamliel in the boat, but not in a deer v'sahar, not in the pen or the stable. What we're going to later see is, well, do they really disagree? Because it doesn't necessarily sound like they disagree in the boat case, because Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva just wanted to be extra stringent, but not that they really thought that the law was that way. But we'll get back to that later. So now we're going to say, Dekule alma miat, what's true about Rav and Shmuel? They both agree that besvina we hold like Rabban Gamliel in the boat case. So my time, or what's the reason? We had a machloket Rabbi and Rabbi Zera. Rabbi says, Ho'il v'shabbat ba'avir mechitzo b'bod yom, because you were already in a walled place before Shabbat, right? Different from when they put you in the deer v'sahar. But when you weren't there before Shabbat, but in the boat, you got into the boat before Shabbat. It's just that the boat left the tchum on Shabbat. So that's different. And Rabbi Zera says, since the Sfina notes arba manachto b'sof arba, which we said Rashi gives 3 different interpretations of what this is, not exactly clear. We'll go with the one that says that basically you're constantly moving, and therefore you either have 4 amot or you have the whole boat. Now, in this case, you can't ever acquire 4 amot because you never have 4 amot. You're always moving. You're always in a different place. So you never really acquire your 4 amot. If you don't acquire your 4 amot, then basically you're allowed to walk around in the boat. One opinion, by the way, of Rashi says that you can only walk in the direction the boat is going. You can't walk back, that way, but you can only walk in the way that the boat is going. But anyway, that's as an aside. So then the Gemara said, what's the difference between them? And they gave 2 nafkaminas, either if the boat walls fall apart, right? There are no walls anymore, or you jump to another boat, and then you wouldn't have Rabbi's explanation, but you would have Rabbi Zera. Okay, now let's start from the bottom. Rabbi Zera, my time alo amar karabba. We're going to say, why doesn't each one hold like the other? Amar lacha, he would say to you, mechitzot lavriach mayim asuyot. This is very interesting. Until now, we always say mechitzot or mechitzot. It doesn't matter why they were built, how they were built. Remember, even a mechitzot that's built on Shabbat is fine for carrying purposes and things like that. But now we're going to say, in this case, when it comes to tchum, you need mechitzot to say you can be in this area if the mechitzot are for the purposes of the inside, to protect you or to, right? But in this case, all the mechitzot do is to keep the water out of the boat, right? Why does this boat have sides? Because otherwise the boat will fill up with water and sink. That's not a mechitza. That doesn't function as a mechitza for the purposes of what we're looking for a mechitza to say, oh, this is my space. No, it's just to keep the water out. That's not the same. So that's what his approach is, and that's why he doesn't think about these walls. The Rabba, my time Rabbi Zera. Why doesn't he say like Rabbi Zera? So he says the following thing. And now we switch a little bit about how we understand this machloket about the boat. Okay, remember, you can look at the chart. Okay, Rabbi Zera was the one who said, if you look at the sheet I made. So Rabbi Zera says, because you never really acquire 4 amot. So now we're going to say Rabbi doesn't agree with him because he thinks that what Rabbi Zera says is so true that everyone agrees with it. Okay, meaning that even Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehoshua will say that if the boat's constantly moving, of course you don't acquire 4 amot. They would agree with him so much so that they don't even think there's a machloket. So you can't say we hold like Rabbi Gamliel because it's mahalechet, because you never acquire 4 amot, because we wouldn't even hold like Rabbi Gamliel. There's no machloket. They all agree. And we would hold like him, but so would Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva. So there's no machloket there. Ki pliga, the machloket is b'sha'amda. The only time they argue is if this boat is actually standing. Then they argue just like the Dir Vasar case. Here you have something standing with walls, right? Do we say? So therefore, he doesn't think that Rabbi Zera is saying that's why we hold like Rabban Gamliel is true, because you only say we hold like him if there's actually a machloket. And he doesn't think there's a machloket if the boat's constantly moving. And now we're going to bring 2 supports for this reading. Okay? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Matnitin nami daika. You can actually infer this from our Mishnah. From 2 cases in our Mishnah, one can infer that this is true, that if the boat's constantly moving, there's no machloket, and the machloket would only be if they're standing. Why? So matnitin nami daika de b'mahalechet lo pligi, that they don't actually argue when the boat's moving. Everyone would agree that you could walk around the whole boat. Mimai midekatane ma'aseh shabal mipal darsin. Remember, that was the case. And now we're going to finally explain why it says when they actually sound like they would think even according to the law. Remember, if we say they wanted to be stringent, it means they don't really hold that way. They just wanted to be stringent. So Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah halchu et kula. They walked around the whole boat. Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva lo zazu me'arba amot sheratzu lachmir al atzmam. Now, why? Let's try to fill in 2 different options. So we're going to start with, they actually don't disagree if the boat is constantly moving. So then that would explain it. What they say. You're right that me'ikar adin from the letter of the law, it's no problem because the boat's moving. And therefore you can walk around this whole boat. However, what they say, maybe the boat will stop. And if the boat stops, then you're going to acquire only 4 amot and you can't walk around the boat. Or maybe next time you'll be on a boat and the boat will be stationary and you'll think that you can walk around the whole boat and you can't. So therefore, they wanted to be stringent, even in a case where it was potentially allowed. And that explains their approach. But if you say they weren't arguing in the case where the boat moves, then, I'm sorry, I skipped. I went back by accident. If you say they argue in that case, right, we're now about 10 lines from the top. If you say they argue, Hai Ratzulach Mil Isurahu, then you wouldn't say they wanted to be stringent, you would say it's forbidden, right? And therefore, it can't possibly be. Okay? So therefore, they prove from the Mishnah that the case must have been that the boat was moving. Everyone agrees that it's okay, and that's what we just said that Rabba would say, why he didn't agree with Rabbi Zera. And then you would say that's why they wanted to be stringent. They said even though theoretically you could walk around the whole boat, we want to be stringent and not allow you to, just in case the boat stops, or in another situation, you're in a case where the boat stopped, and then you'll think it's okay to walk around the whole boat. And now, Amarav Ashi Matnitin Nami Deika. You can also further prove from the Mishnah, and this is what I said in the beginning, that it's a little tricky with the structure of the Mishnah, the way he's setting this up, but we'll read it and then I'll explain what's difficult. To Katane Sfina. The Mishnah talks about 2 cases. It talks about a dir v'sahar, the pen in the stable, and it also talks about a boat. So now they're going to say, since it says sfina and it says dir v'sahar, it must be sfina dumia de dir v'sahar. It must be the boat is forbidden in the way that's similar to a dir v'sahar. Now, what's unique about a dir v'sahar? It's a pen or a stable. Ma dir v'sahar dikvie, they don't move, they're stationary. Sfina nami dikvie. Also, the case in the boat where they disagree must be in the case of a boat that's stationary and not a boat that's moving. And that must be the disagreement. Now, what's the problem with this? Well, the problem is that the Mishnah doesn't exactly say that they have a machloket about a boat, right? Remember the structure of the Mishnah. Go back for a quick minute. The Mishnah said, dir v'sahar, there's a machloket. Can you walk in the whole Dir V'Sahar or only 4 amot? Then it brought a case with a boat where Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yeshua wanted to be extra stringent. It never says explicitly in the Mishnah that they argue also about a boat. But Rav Ashi is kind of reading the Mishnah as if it says in the Mishnah that they argue about a boat, just like they argue about a Dir V'Sahar. That's number one problem with Rav Ashi's proof. It never really says that, right? It does juxtapose these two cases, but they're not even parallel in the Mishnah because remember, the boat case is a case where they wanted to be machmir, they wanted to be extra stringent, and it's not necessarily a parallel case to the Dir V'Sahar. And number two, one could also argue against him and say, well, that was the whole point of bringing the boat, to say the Dir V'Sahar is stationary. The boat is not stationary, and yet they still argue. So one could make that kind of argument and knock out Rav Ashi. But in any case, they bring Rav Ashi as a proof, and nobody seems to disagree with it, even though what I am raising are some potential problems with his proof. Amar le Rav Acha b'rei de Rava. Rav Ashi. So now Rav Acha, the son of Rava, comes to Rav Ashi and says, Hilchata Rav Nachman b'sfina. Okay, wait. Rav and Shmuel both said, remember, this is where we started. The halacha is like Rabban Gamliel in the boat case. And this goes back to what I just said a minute ago, which is the Mishnah never really says that they argued in a boat case. It only said that in this particular situation, they were in those two rabbis, right? Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva wanted to be extra stringent. It doesn't really say they argue. So Hilchatam bichlal de pligi sounds like they disagree about this. If you have to say the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel, sounds like they disagree about the law. So they say, yes, in fact, they really do disagree. Even though it doesn't say so explicitly in the Mishnah, we have a different source that seems to imply that they disagreed. And again, it's a bit of a strange source. You'll see why in a minute. V'hatanya Chananya, okay, where they're telling us in parentheses here, he was the nephew of Rabbi Yeshua, which is important because in a minute, he's going to quote his uncle, who's Rabbi Yeshua. Okay, remember, who is part of this whole thing. Remember, Rabbi Yeshua was on the side of Rabbi Akiva, who disagreed with Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So Hananya Omer kol oto hayom. Now it could be they're talking about the day they were on the boat, or maybe some other day. Yashvu v'danu b'dvar halacha. Okay, they sat and discussed the halacha. Em eshichriya achi abba halacha k'Rabban Gamliel. And then my father's brother, meaning Rabbi Yeshua, said the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel b'sfina, halacha k'Rabbi Akiva v'dir v'sahar. Rabbi Yeshua himself said, listen, let's make a compromise. We'll hold like Rabban Gamliel, and obviously Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, when it comes to the boat, but we're going to hold like Rabbi Akiva, he doesn't mention his own name, but Rabbi Akiva, the other approach, when it comes to the Dir V'Sahar. So basically on a boat, we're going to allow walking in the whole thing, and on the Dir V'Sahar in the stable, we're only going to allow you 4 amot. Now, from the fact that he says this, seems very clear that Rabbi Yeshua disagrees in the boat case. It's just he says, I'll let it go and I'll agree with you. But he obviously disagreed because otherwise you don't say the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel if there's no disagreement. So therefore they say it must be that they really do disagree. And that explains Rav and Shmuel who said the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel in a boat. Even though it doesn't say so explicitly in the Mishnah, it must be they disagree. And then one can explain it the way we did, which is Mahalechet, they all agree that it's fine. It's only when the boat is standing do we say it's forbidden to walk more than 4 amot or not. The problem with this statement is we don't accept Hananiah's statement la halacha because he's quoting Rabbi Yeshua, who's what we call nogeh b'davar. He's one of the players here. He can't rule, right? It's nice he makes this compromise, but he can't say, oh, we paskin like Rabban Gamliel here and we paskin like my side in the other case because he's nogeh b'davar, as we say, and therefore we don't accept the testimony. Even though, right, this does prove that they argued in that case, but it doesn't necessarily prove what we do halacha l'maaseh. Now we get to a question which is going to lead to all sorts of interesting things like people flying and Eliyahu and the Mashiach and all sorts of interesting things. So we're going to get quite off I would say, the plane of reality for this next section. Okay, we're going to start off kind of grounded in reality and then all of a sudden get all into a different area. Okay, I see someone's asking about a Carmelite and all that, but a Carmelite has nothing to do with Tchumen. Okay, remember, there's 2 different issues. There's Hotza'ah, carrying on Shabbat, and all that which has to do with Carmelite. And then there's Isur Tchumen, which is going outside your 2,000 Amim. Right now we're talking about that, which has nothing to do with Carmelite, Rashid, or Rabim, or anything else. That has to do with measuring 2,000 Amim outside your city or outside wherever you were Konesh Shvita. Okay, by Rav Hananya. Yesh Tchumen l'mala me'asara, o ein Tchumen l'mala me'asara. Now this reminds us of Hotza'ah, where we said when it comes to carrying, what did we say? Above 10 tfachim off the ground, 10 handbreadths off the ground. it's already a separate domain if you're in the public domain. Remember? And then that's called a makom p'tur, that whole space above. So now they want to know, what about tchumin? Is there tchumin l'mala me'asara or not? So what exactly do they mean? What's the relevance? So they say, well, the question is not in this case. Lo tibayelach. Sorry, I skipped into l'mala me'asara. Okay, amud. Okay, we're now about 15 lines from the bottom. Amud gavoa asara v'rachav arba'a lo tibayelach. If you have a beam that's 10 handbreadths off the ground and it's 4 by 4 wide, and you're standing on there, and while you're on that beam, you walk outside the tchum. Obviously, there's tchum in there. Why? Lo tibayelach, that's not the question. Da'ara smichtihi, you're on very stable ground. Remember we talked about this, putting your eruv on something that's 4 by 4 wide, right? It has to have stability if it's 10 tefachim off the ground. If it's stable, then it's as if you're on the ground. And then, of course, you've gone over the boundary. But ki tibayelach, what if, now you're not exactly flying here, but what if you're on some very precarious spot up in the air? And it's not 4 by 4 wide, 4 by 4 amot wide. Actually, no, it's 4 arba'at tfachim. It's 4 handbreadths wide. It's not 4 by 4 handbreadths wide. And while you're on this very precarious beam, you cross over into the tchum, okay, out of the tchum. Inami, or you jump. Let's say there's a pole and you jump to another pole and you've gone through the airspace outside the tchum, right, at a height of 10 tefachim off the ground. Or maybe kvitza means almost flying, which we're going to get to later. Lishna achrina bisfina mai. Or some people say maybe the question is about being in a boat. Because in a boat, your boat is always going to be, and now we're going to have to go back to our Mishnah, reinterpret our Mishnah, a boat is always, or almost always, 10 tefachim off the ground, because the ground is all the way underneath, and there's water, and then there's your boat. Generally, you're going to be more than 10 handbreadths off the ground. So maybe there's no issue in a boat, and likewise, right, if we take it to nowadays, on an airplane, right, an airplane is above the tchum. That's why some people say if you get off an airplane, right, and you're out, you've gone through the tchum, let's say you get off an airplane on Shabbat, let's say the airplane, there was a problem, you only landed on Shabbat. So theoretically, you could probably get off the airplane because you didn't leave the tchum because you were up in the airspace, right? So only when you get onto ground do we start your tchum. Okay, so maybe that's, right, you're above this 10 tefachim space. So Amar Rav Oshaya, now they're going to bring 4 different sources. Okay, the structure is going to work like this. 4 sources, the first 2 Tannaitic sources, then we're going to bring something from an Amora, then we're going to bring another Tannaitic source, and that last Tannaitic source we're going to try to learn in 2 different ways an answer to the question, and with all of these sources, we're not going to succeed in getting an answer. Okay, that's the basic structure. So Tashma, let's learn from here. What source? Our Mishnah. Maseh Shabbat, right? If the question is about a boat or something like a boat where it's above 10 tefachim, then we can learn it from our Mishnah. Because Maseh Shabbat mipal darsim, v'ifliga sfinatam bayam. So now what happened? There was a whole machloket, right? Can you walk in? Obviously they left the tchum, that's obvious because they're having all discussion. So now let's go back. Remember, they wanted to be extra stringent. Now, you're not going to be stringent if there's no isur tchumin at all. There has to be some issue of tchumin to basically say we're going to be stringent. So therefore, you'd have to say, yes, there's tchumin above 10. Otherwise, why would they be machmir? But if you say there's no tchumin issue above 10, then why, right? Rabban Gamliel says you could walk in the whole boat. Well, that makes sense because you could say there's no tchumin problem. Maybe that's what he was saying. But if they wanted to be machmir, now it's interesting. You could say maybe they wanted to be machmir, even though generally we don't hold tchumin, right? In this kind of case, we'll be machmir. But that's not what they're assuming. If there's you're way above the tchum, then of course we're not going to be stringent in any way. So therefore, it doesn't make any sense. So now the Gemara says, just like Rava said elsewhere, Kida Amar Rava, and elsewhere we're going to see in 1 minute, just like he said it there, that they were in very shallow waters. And basically where they were standing in the boat was less than 10 handbreadths off the ground. Hachanami, we could say the same thing. You can say the exact same thing here, that this was a case where the boat was in very shallow waters. Actually, it's quite difficult to say this because they were coming, according to the Steinsaltz, said they were coming from Italy to Israel. Generally, at least we assume they were coming to Israel. Likely you're going to be in deep waters, so it seems hard to imagine, but maybe they were in some area that was very shallow, and that's the situation. And then that's why you would say it's a tchumin problem, and it doesn't teach us anything about above 10 because the case wasn't in above 10. Tashma, let's bring another source, also from our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? If you remember the last part of our Mishnah, which we're going to get to later today, there was a case where they were on a boat with Rabban Gamliel and they only got to the port once it was dark. And then what happened? He said, oh, don't worry. I saw that we were within the Tchum when Shabbat started, and therefore you can get off the boat. And you can walk around wherever you want because you're still within the Tchum. So so obviously, if he had to say we were within the Tchum, then obviously you would have to say there's Tchum in Lamala Me'asara because the boat was above 10 and there was a Tchum issue. And who cares then if we were within the Tchum or not? It shouldn't make a difference. You should be able to walk wherever you want because you were above 10. So Amar Rava, that's where Rava said that we quoted a minute ago. Rava says, there he says, again, they were in shallow waters, and that's why. This case, by the way, makes more sense. If they were close to the shore, then you could say, right, they were close to the port, you could say maybe the water was shallow that whole way, and maybe that's why. So again, it would have to be a case where there was a tchum problem. It doesn't teach you anything necessarily above 10. Now we're getting to Eliyahu Hanavi and the Mashiach. So here comes an interesting source. Tashma, Haneshev Shmatata, Did Amrin Betzafra Beshabta, Kamei de Rav Chisda Besura, Bahade Pan Yashabta, Kamei de Rava Bepubedita. So there was a case where these 7 halachot, some people say it was these 7 halachot about treifot, these 7 halachot about which animals, what kind of sickness makes an animal a treifa, that if you shecht it, it's not going to be kosher. There were these 7 halachot that were said in the morning, on Shabbat morning, in front of Rav Chisda in Surah, and in the afternoon of Shabbat in front of Rava in Pubedita. If you look in the Koran, they explain that the distance between Surah and Pubedita was 100 kilometers. Okay, that is way beyond the Tchum in any realistic way. And not only that, but in those days, no one could travel 100 kilometers in a day. So therefore, they say if someone brought the halachot in one yeshiva in the morning and another yeshiva in the afternoon on Shabbat, it has to be what? Man Amarinu, Lav Eliyahu Amarinu, must have been Eliyahu, because Eliyahu magically can sort of fly or appear, right? We don't know exactly, right? First of all, you have Eliyahu, he went up to the heavens when he died, and they assume, right, he could be kind of floating around. And if Eliyahu was able to go from one to the other, he must have been flying, right? The only way to get there would be through flying. And notice he was allowed to pass the Tchum. Must be, Alma ein Tchumin lamala me'asara. Okay, they learned from Eliyahu Hanavi the fact that he must have gone from one place to the other on Shabbat shows, and he must have done it through flying or some sort of magical way, shows he must have traveled somehow through the airspace above 10 tefachim in the ground, above the ground, and therefore it must be there's no isur tchumin because we assume Eliyahu keeps halachot. Okay, so the Gemara rejects this and says, "Lo, interesting answer, not the kind you would have expected." Dilma Yosef Shida Amarinhu. Okay, this is difficult for many reasons. Okay, maybe Yosef, the evil spirit, the shade. Okay, the evil spirit. Maybe he's the one who said this. First of all, what is an evil spirit doing in a yeshiva telling halachot? That's, in the Beit Midrash, reciting halachot, and that seems a little bit strange in the first place, that they're even listening to halachot said by an evil spirit. So anyway, it's a little bit strange here what's going on. Some people say that he in fact was someone who was a person who worked the demons. Okay, it was his job to kind of, work with them, and he was the one who said it. Some people say he didn't, and how does this, by the way, resolve our issue? So the issue is that if it's Eliyahu, well, then he obviously keeps halacha. If it's Yosef, the shade, or whatever we call him, whether he's the shade himself, some people say it was just a person who didn't keep halacha, and they called him Yosef Shade. It was like a bad nickname for him, okay? And therefore, once we say that, we say, oh, well, he obviously didn't care about halacha, so that doesn't mean anything. We can't learn halacha from him, even though he was the one who brought these halachot to the Beit Midrash. It's a little bit strange. Anyway, this whole sugya is a little bit interesting in general. Okay, next source. Tashma, we're up to source number 3. So we tried source number 4, okay? We had the first source, right? The 2 parts of our Mishnah that seemed to say there was a tchumen problem in a boat, seems to mean above 10 tefachim. Both of them, we said, oh no, they were below. Then we had this case of someone who magically brought the halachot to 2 places that were very far from each other. And we say it must have been a shade or some sort of demon or some sort of person who didn't keep halacha and therefore doesn't teach us anything about halacha. Tashma, source number 4, which I said we're going to try in 2 different ways to learn something from this source. Hareini Nazir b'yom sheben David ba. Somebody makes the following statement. We're going to get to things like this when we learn Nazirut about words that I say and what happens. When is this going to apply? So I say, I'm going to become a Nazir, which generally means I'm going to take upon myself to be a Nazir for 30 days. One of the things I can't do is drink wine. So if you say, I'm going to become a Nazir on the day that the Mashiach comes, Ben David is a reference to the Mashiach. Well, the problem is we don't know when the Mashiach is coming. So maybe, right, let's say the Mashiach comes in the afternoon. So then I'm supposed to be a Nazir starting from the morning. So what do we say? Mutar l'shtot yayin, you can drink wine, meaning your Nazirut doesn't work. B'shabbatot u'biyamim tovim. This doesn't work on Shabbat and Yom Tov. V'asur l'shtot yayin kol yemot hachol. But you can drink wine, but you can't drink wine on a weekday. So now we're going to say, well, what does this teach you? Okay, we're going to have to understand the source a little better later, what it means exactly. I'll get back to it. So let's just leave it at that right now. So now the question is, why isn't the Mashiach coming on Shabbat or Yom Tov? So if you say yesh tchumin lamala me'asara, above 10, that's why it's allowed on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Because clearly the Mashiach's not going to come, because again, assuming the Mashiach comes magically. By the way, some of the Mepharshim say, wait, isn't the Mashiach sometimes just someone living among us, and he could just say, I'm the Mashiach, and doesn't need to actually walk anywhere? But let's just leave that point aside. Okay, we're assuming the Mashiach is somehow magically appearing. And again, maybe he would have to come through the airspace above 10 and from outside the Tchum. And that's why he doesn't come. But if you say there's no problem of Tchumin, right? Why would you be allowed to drink wine? Theoretically, he could show up on that day also. So they say, no. You misunderstood why he can't come on Shabbat and Yom Tov. It has nothing to do with Tchumin, which again means this source teaches us nothing about our question. Shanei Hatam Damarkra, the pasuk says, Hine Anochi, right? Very famous pasuk from we read it on Shabbat Gadol in Malachi. Hine Anochi sholech lachem et Eliyahu Hanavi. I'll read you the whole pasuk. Lifnei bo Yom Hashem Hagadol v'Norah. First, before the Mashiach comes, Eliyahu is going to tell us the Mashiach is coming. He's going to come the day before and herald in the Mashiach. And that's why, okay, so what does this have to do with anything? V'halo ata Eliyahu me'etmol. Okay, so wait, what's the issue? So Eliyahu didn't come on Friday, and that's why on Shabbat you can drink wine, because you know the Mashiach didn't come, but that doesn't make any sense. As if the whole idea is, well, Eliyahu's coming the day before, and you're sitting here on Shabbat, and you know, well, Eliyahu didn't come the day before. That's why we know that you can drink wine on Shabbat, but that doesn't make any sense, because well, then every weekday you should be allowed to drink wine, because every weekday, right, Eliyahu didn't come yesterday, so you know the Mashiach's not coming today. So therefore, it doesn't make sense. But then they explain, no, you misunderstood again. Listre, sorry, I should have read on. This is still part of the question. Right, Eliyahu didn't come yesterday, and therefore you should be allowed to drink every day. But now they say, Ela amrin on the Beitin Hagadol. The assumption is the Mashiach is going to come to the Beitin Hagadol. Likewise, Eliyahu is going to come to the Beitin Hagadol, which maybe means you don't know. Maybe Eliyahu came yesterday, and we just don't know. So again, we're back to square one. So why are we allowed to drink wine on Shabbat? And it's obvious he's not coming on Shabbat. Here's a really interesting answer. The reason is not having anything to do with Mashiach not coming on Shabbat or Yom Tov. It's just that Eliyahu, who's coming the day before, can't come on Friday or Erev Chag. Why? Because obviously what makes Friday and Erev Chag unique? Everybody's busy preparing. Mipnei Torah. Everybody's busy getting ready for Shabbat and Yom Tov. We don't want to disturb the people in their preparations for Shabbat and Yom Tov. They won't be able to get ready. If the Eliyahu comes, right, everything's going to go crazy. So because of that, we don't want Eliyahu coming and disturbing everyone. So he doesn't come on Friday, which means the Mashiach doesn't come on Shabbat or Yom Tov. And that's why you can eat on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Again, this has nothing to do with chum or not. This is why you can, drink your wine. Right? If you say, I'm going to be a Nazir, you're not going to be a Nazir on Shabbat and Yom Tov because the Mashiach's definitely not coming that day. But now they say, so now they say, wait, if Eliyahu is not going to come in Erev Shabbat, then obviously the Mashiach's also not going to come in Erev Shabbat because it would be the same problem. And then, if that's the case, right? Why did it say only on Shabbat and Yom Tov the Mashiach can't come? It seems like if Eliyahu can't come on Friday, the Mashiach also can't come on Friday because again, everyone's busy getting ready for Shabbat. We don't want the Mashiach to come then either. So now they're going to, and it didn't say that in that source. So if this is your answer, this answer doesn't make sense because it would apply also to the Mashiach not coming. So now they say, right, it's this fascinating discussion they're having, trying to figure out all these things about things that we obviously don't really know a lot about. So now they say, which doesn't seem to disturb the rabbis, right, in terms of raising all these possible theories about Mashiach and when Mashiach's going to come, when Eliyahu is going to come. So what do they answer? Lo ate lishtre Eliyahu, lo ate Mashiach. Lo ate Eliyahu, lo ate Mashiach ate. Right? Eliyahu won't come, but the Mashiach will come. Why? The Mashiach can come even though we're all busy getting ready for Shabbat. And here's an interesting answer, and it actually really connects with what we talked about on Rosh Hashanah in our davening. Right? We say, what happens in that tefillah? Right? That everyone's going to come and worship God. They're all going to believe in God, which means that we're going to have a lot of people. And it doesn't mean they're all going to be enslaved to us, even though it uses the word slave. What it means is that all the non-Jews who right now don't believe in God are all going to come believe in God, meaning they're all going to help us get ready for Shabbat. So we're going to have all of a sudden a lot of helpers, and it's going to be very easy to get ready for Shabbat. Okay. Again, I think this is those ideal, right? When they idealize what's going to be in the time of Mashiach, about, getting ready for Shabbat is going to be super easy, right? We all struggle for trying to find enough time to get ready, especially coming off of 2 days. So, right, it's going to all magically become easier for us, right? I see if they all become Jewish, do they need a prayer for Shabbat? The whole concept, it's a good question how this is exactly going to work in reality. I don't know that they really thought about the reality of it. But they're basically saying, that's not going to be an issue, and that's why Friday, still potentially the Mashiach could come. But now they're going to say, so now on Sunday, it should be allowed. So now they're going to try a different way. Okay, now they're going to say, so we understand the Mashiach isn't coming on Shabbat. But now we should say, on Sunday, you should be allowed to drink wine. Forget about the Mashiach now. If the Mashiach can come potentially on Shabbat, on Yom Rishon, the Mashiach can't come only on Shabbat, we said, which means the Mashiach could come on Sunday, which means now, let's move focus spotlight on Eliyahu. Well, then Eliyahu can come on Shabbat. If Eliyahu can come on Shabbat, then again, we're back to square one. And we can prove from here that Ein Tchumin Lamala Me'asara, because Eliyahu can come on Shabbat. So what do they answer? Classic Gemara answer. Hai Tana Sipuke Misapkale. Yesh Tchumin o Ein Tchumin Ulachumra. Period. Okay, what does he say? The Tana of this Braita that said, if you say, right, the day that Mashiach comes, I'm going to be a Nazir, you're not, now what are we doing? We're being stringent by saying you're not allowed to drink wine on Sunday. Why? Because theoretically, maybe, okay, now let's play it out. If there's no Tchumin problem above 10, then you'd say Eliyahu can come on Shabbat, in which case the Mashiach might come on Sunday. And that's why we have to be stringent. But it could be there's no Tchumin problem, and there is Tchumin, Lamala Me'asara, there is, in which case Eliyahu can't come on Shabbat, in which case the Mashiach will never come on Sunday. But since we don't know the answer to this question, we're going to be stringent and say that maybe there is no problem with Tchumin Lamala Me'asara, and maybe Eliyahu will come, which means that maybe the Mashiach will come on Sunday, which means that you have to be stringent and you can't drink wine if you said, I'm going to be a Nazir on the day the Mashiach comes. So therefore, we don't have any proof here. Okay, that's where we end. So now we're going to move on to a separate question about this Braita. So like I said, we've tried 5 attempts, really 4 sources, but 5 attempts within those 4 sources to try to prove, is there Tchumin, is there not? The last source, it was more, right, spotlight on the Mashiach or spotlight on Eliyahu, and either which way, we can't really confirm definitively whether there's Tchumin or not. And in the end, we're going to say, right, so we don't know the answer to this question. But now they want to go understand this source a little better. There's something that I specifically didn't get into, which I want to get into now, which is if you say, I'm going to be a Nazir when, on the day that the Mashiach comes, and then we say every day, maybe the Mashiach is coming. So it sounded like from that source that every day of the week, you're not allowed to drink wine. But on Shabbat, you are allowed to drink wine because the Mashiach's not coming on Shabbat. Now, what's the problem? The problem is if you, out of doubt, have to take on Nazirut now, Nazirut isn't just a day. It's not like you're saying, I vow today I'm not going to drink wine. No, Nazirut is something that goes for 30 days. Now, in this case, since it never definitively starts, it never definitively ends. So basically, you end up being a Nazir out of Sefek forever. But according to the Braita, it sounds like every Shabbat and every Chag, you're allowed to drink wine, which doesn't really make any sense. And that's what the Gemara is going to ask. Tekai Emat, what day are you standing when you made this declaration? Dekanadal, that you made this declaration, I'm going to be a Nazir. If you were standing on a weekday when you said this, once we said you're a Nazir out of Safek, you're now a Nazir for the continuum. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to drink now and break my Nazirut on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Elad, so it must be Dekai b'Shabta v'Kanadar u'b'Yom Tov v'Kanadar. You were either standing on Shabbat or you were standing on Yom Tov. And what the Bright is telling you is, Hahu Yom Adasharele mikam va'elach asrele. That first day that you made the declaration, clearly the Mashiach's not coming, because we just said the Mashiach doesn't come on Shabbat, because Eliyahu doesn't come on Friday. And because of that, you won't be a Nazir that day, but starting from the next day, you're already a Nazir because of a doubt. Maybe the Mashiach is coming. And therefore, your Nazir just continues on. And the next Shabbat or the next Chag that comes, obviously, you're not allowed to drink wine. And that was just an aside to try to understand that Braita. Okay, back to our Mishnah. And now we're going to get into this a really fascinating daf from many different angles. You know, talking about Mashiach and when Mashiach is coming and Eliyahu and how the whole thing is going to work out and flying and you know, demons. It's a very interesting daf. Now we're going to get into measuring implements, okay, and things that existed in the time of the Talmud, which are very interesting, which again, it's not 100% clear how these worked and what they were, but we'll see. We'll try to explain them in a very basic manner. So now they quote a Braita. Remember, they didn't get into the Namal before Shabbat. And then they basically said, oh, we have to wait till, Rabban Gamliel said there's no problem to go in and walk around because we already got to the Tchum before Shabbat. Remember, they weren't in an enclosed space. If they were in an enclosed space on the port, then they would have obviously been able to walk around wherever they wanted because Rabban Gamliel says you can do that. But here they landed in open space and they left the Tchum, so they wouldn't be able to walk anywhere. But Rabban Gamliel says, oh, don't worry, because I checked and we were already within the Tchum before Shabbat. And we said then, how did he know that? So we'll see. And that's when Shabbat came in, we were already within 2,000 Amma from the shore. Tana, Shvoferet Haitalo Rabban Gamliel. Oh, he had a reed, like a tube kind of thing, which Shahayam Mabit Usofeba Vitsofeba Alpaim Ama Biyabasha. Okay, like a kind of astrolabe, okay, where he would be able to look through and measure how far it is. So some people explain it in different ways. Could be just it was a measuring implement that he knew he could see 2,000 Amma from there. And since he could see the shore, he knew that they were within range. Okay, there's all different explanations given as to how this worked. Maybe it worked with angles like a protractor. It's fascinating. I mean, if you're into all these kind of things, you know, these are the sugyot that are fascinating to try to figure out, right? This is not my area of expertise. But there are people who really like this is they love looking at Talmudic statements like this about all sorts of measuring implements that they had in those days. So he could see Alpayim Ama on the land, and he could also see Alpayim in the water. Okay, it was a way he can measure both on land and on water distance. Harotze, now the Braita continues with all sorts of other measuring implements. Harotze le'da kama kosher gai. If you want to know how deep a valley is, you can bring a type of reed and you can use it to measure the angles. Again, some sort of implement they had, special implement that would measure how, you know, what the angle is, and from there they could get to how deep it was. If you want to know how tall a palm tree is, this is a very primitive way of doing it. You measure your height and the height of your shadow, and you see the ratio between your shadow to your height. Right, so then you measure moded komato v'tzilo, right, and then v'tzel komato v'yeda kama gova shel dekel, and then you measure the shadow of the height of the, you know, the height of the shadow of the palm tree, and from there you can measure what the height of the tree is. So you basically go, my shadow to me is like the shadow of the palm tree to the height of the palm tree, because obviously it's quite difficult to measure the height of the palm tree. It's so high up. Last one, if you don't want animals, okay, or bad animals, it was probably looked at as bad luck, to hang out in the shade, right? We know that animals just look for shade anywhere when they're outside. It's a sunny day, right? Imagine weather like this right now. Certainly in Israel, it's super hot. So the animals, the cats always try to find a shady spot somewhere and they go and hide underneath something. So if you don't want animals hanging out under a grave of one of your relatives, what do? No, etz kaneh b'daled sha'ot b'yom. What you do is you put a reed in at 4 hours into the day. V'yireh lehechan tzilo noteh. Okay, you look at how it casts a shadow. And then mashpia v'oleh, mashpia v'yored. You basically, it sounds like you move the tombstone, or I don't know if they have tombstones, but you basically figure out a way to make sure that whatever's there is blocking the shadow from happening. And then you basically end up with no shadow there, in which case you end up, the animal won't hang out there. The animal will go somewhere else. And then you basically won't have an issue, because then the assumption is even when the shadow changes, the animal will have settled somewhere and they'll stay there for the day. 4 hours into the day is about 10 in the morning. That's when the sun starts casting shadows. I see that Ruth is telling me that they're carnivorous wild animals, and maybe there was a concern of maybe, I guess I assume what you're pointing out is that maybe they would eat the body, and maybe that was the concern. And also pointing out maybe they were covering the grave with a mound of dirt that would basically create a problem that, that there wouldn't be a shadow. Okay, so you basically use this reed to assess which direction the shadow is going in, and then you can figure out how to create a situation where there's no shadow. Last part for today, and we'll only start with this today. There was a situation that happened. Nehemiah bered Rav Chanilai, the son of Rav Chanilai, Nehemiah, mishachtei shmatata, he was learning. Now remember we said the other day, maybe you end up leaving the tchum because you were busy learning. So here we said here was a person, and maybe because of the story they thought of it. He was busy learning, and he got carried away and walked outside the tchum by accident. So what happened? Amar le Rav Chisda le Rav Nachman. So Rav Chisda gets word of this, and he goes to Rav Nachman, and he says to him, Nehemiah talmidcha sharoi b'tza'ar. He said, Nehemiah, your student is pained. He's stuck outside the tchum on Shabbat now. By accident, he got there, and now how can you help him? Now the Gemara is going to ask, and I'm not going to start this. It starts at the end of today's daf, but the Gemara is going to ask at the end of today's daf. It just continues into tomorrow, so we'll pick up with it tomorrow as to why Rav Chisda didn't know the answer, and as what was bothering Rav Chisda, he couldn't come up with this on his own. But we'll get to that tomorrow. Amar lo, so what does Rav Nachman say? Aseh lo mechitza shel bnei adam v'yikanes. Create a human partition. Okay, this is very interesting. I saw that you can even create a human partition for a wall of your sukkah if you want. You have to actually not tell the person they're functioning as a wall, but you can use them as a wall. Interesting halachot about this. But basically, make a human partition. Have the people make a partition around him. Now, remember, what did we say? If you're within a partition, what does Rav Gamliel say? You can walk around the whole space. So create a human partition around him that extends. Now, we're going to have to see tomorrow exactly how far it extends. Sounds like for right now, let's just assume it extends into the tchum. And then he's allowed to walk in that whole space. He can walk into the tchum. And from there, he's already in the city. And then because he walked out by accident, he's allowed to walk wherever he wants in the city. And that's the solution. Okay, tomorrow we're going to see what exactly was the human partition all the way to the tchum? What was the issue with Rav Chisda? Why didn't he think of this on his own? So we'll get to that tomorrow. Have a good day, everyone. Som Kal. Have a good fasting. And we'll pick up from here tomorrow.